Right, we will get underway. So, welcome everyone. My name is Tony Briley, CEO of AuSAE, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to an open access webinar, Why Industry Data Matters to Your Association's Success. Before we get underway, I will begin our webinar by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land which we are meeting on this morning, paying our respects to Aboriginal Torres Strait Islanders people of Australia, the oldest continuing culture on the planet, and to the Māori, the tangata whenua of Aotearoa, New Zealand. We honour their enduring connection to land, sea, and community, and pay respects to elders past and present, as well as to any Indigenous and First Nations people attending today. So today we are digging into data. Now, I know a lot of people, and I know because you're here, that you are interested in data. And I know that our presenter, Brenda Mainland from Survey Matters, is going to tell us that data is our greatest asset in our organisations. And not only that, but actually talk about how we can use these effectively. So for those who don't know Brenda, she is the co-founder and managing director of Survey Matters, and a specialist in association research, and a great partner of AuSAE. So really committed to supporting the sector and enabling the sector to do better. So Brenda, I'm going to hand over to you. As always, we have our questions. So Q&A is open, but also feel free just to pop your questions in the chat. We will probably we'll get through as much as we can, but if I do encourage you, if you have questions, just pop them in as we go along, and we'll either get to them during or get to them after the webinar. So sit back, relax, and we will hand over to Brenda.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thanks, Tony, for your introduction. And thanks for tuning into this webinar. Today we're going to talk about why reliable and credible industry data is such a powerful tool for your associations. Data helps you tell your story with confidence. It strengthens your advocacy, it supports your member needs, and builds the kind of credibility that stakeholders, governments, and media want to see. So over the next 40 minutes or so, I'm going to share some examples of how Australian associations have used evidence to shift policy debates, to influence opinion, and to reinforce their value. And I hope by the end you'll see that data isn't just information. As Tony said, it's a valuable asset in your value proposition and your advocacy. And now I can't. So let's look at what the session looks like today. We'll talk about the practical ways you can use data to lift your influence and decision making. We'll also explore the role of data in modern associations, how it creates authority and insights. And then we'll look at 4 different case studies of Australian associations using data to support their own individual interests and representation of their members and their strategic goals. And finally, we'll look at some common challenges that we come across when trying to collect data and information, and how you might overcome these, and a roadmap to just help you position perhaps where you are on your journey at the moment. There'll be some time for discussion at the end. Okay, so with that in mind, let's jump into the real question, I guess, which is, how strong is your association's voice? Every association wants to be heard, but the real question is, how strong is your voice when it counts most in policy discussions, funding negotiations, and public debates? You can have a passionate message and deep member stories, but when someone asks you for the evidence, that's the moment that your data becomes power. Associations are sometimes dismissed because they rely on anecdotes, but when I quote Jodie McKenzie from the Australian Counselling Association, there is no policy without data. It shifts you from defending your opinions to presenting facts. When your insights are based on independent evidence, you're no longer just representing your members, you're representing your industry or your profession as a whole. And that's when policy makers start to listen. So let's look at some of the things I'd like you to be able to take away from today's session. I want you to be able to have a clear sense of the value that industry-specific data brings to your association. You'll understand how data builds credibility and advocacy strengths, how it supports our professional standards and workforce planning, and how it increases your influence with key stakeholders. And we'll look at real-world examples of Australian associations using data, and they're all quite different. As we go, I'd like you to think about your own organisation and where perhaps better evidence could strengthen your work, whether it's in policy, membership, or communication. Okay, so let's first look at the role of industry data in associations. Data is more than feedback. It provides the evidence base that you need to make sound decisions and credible claims. Member opinions and feedback about usage and satisfaction still remains a really important thing for associations to understand the value that you offer your members, but it isn't necessarily evidence. Data about your industry or profession as a whole, what it contributes to the economy, the community, and the public, and things around the norms of your profession, working conditions, employment, roles, and demographics. That's evidence. Data allows you to track and understand trends, validate decisions, and demonstrate your impact. When you base your advocacy on evidence, you're no longer saying, oh, our members feel like this. You're saying our data, our industry, our profession looks like this. It employs this many people, it contributes this much, or it faces measurable challenges that can be solved by appropriate policy. That difference changes how you're heard. It helps you move from a reactive to proactive position. It gives you early warning signs of shifts in your sector and helps you tell a consistent fact-based story over time. For example, some members said this was a big issue as an anecdote. A fact is 75% of members report this as their top concern. An anecdote is often easily challenged as just a story, but a fact shows evidence of a pattern or trend. An anecdote also often highlights exceptions, but it lacks the context. A fact shows the scale, frequency, and impact, which turns your voice into credible advocacy. We were at a conference last year on government and social research with government, departmental and authority representatives there, talking about how to get messages across to them. And one speaker put up a big slide, which looked a bit like this, and then said, the plural of anecdote is data. And that really kind of stuck with me. They explained that government has no shortage of opinions coming across their desks every day. What cuts through that noise is data that's current, complete, and credible. And that perspective is a reminder that evidence isn't just for our own planning. It's what earns us a seat at the table when decisions are made. So how do we actually build that kind of data? This is where the data value chain comes in. It shows how raw information becomes influence. And it starts with collection, gathering data that's representative, relevant, and reliable. And then we analyse it, finding patterns and meaning. And we interpret those findings to tell us more about the sector or the membership. We analyse it against other available data for validity. And lastly is action, using those insights to shape policy, programs, messaging, communications, and strategy, and making sure that you're sharing the results transparently so members and stakeholders can also see their value. And although these are a few simple steps, each step adds to weight and credibility. When you close that loop, collect, analyze, interpret, and act, your data becomes a method for continuous improvement and stronger advocacy. Before we go on, I'd like to ask a poll or ask you a question about what's happening in your associations and what your biggest challenge is today when it comes to using data. Tony, I think you've got that poll there.
I do. It's just been launched.
So it's a single response. So thinking about your biggest challenge, and I'll give you a few minutes to pop your answers in. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've stopped receiving answers, so
Yeah.
I'm just going to end that now.
Okay, so got a little bit of information there. We collect data but don't use it effectively. Seems to be the primary challenge, which is common, and you know you're not alone in any of those things. Struggling to get good response rates is another issue that we're all finding, and you know you don't have enough data. Are those are your primary challenges, and you know that is usually what we see. So hopefully, at the end of the day, we'll have some strategies or some ways that you might be able to overcome that. Is the poll question still up?
No, it's gone.
Okay. So let's start with a case study where you'll see where the data value chain comes in. It's from the Australian Counselling Association, or the ACA. In 2024, ACA talked to us about how they could get solid information about the profession. Their goal was simple but quite ambitious: to build a genuine evidence base about counselling, the counselling profession across Australia. Until then, ACA knew a lot anecdotally about the profession and their members, but had no verified data to support its advocacy. And this census changed that. They collected information on geography, employment type, client load, demographics, and career stages, and achieved a participation rate of 1 in 5 practicing counsellors nationwide, which is quite remarkable when we're all struggling with response rates at the moment. So the research exposed gaps, service gaps and workforce capacity, and revealed that on average, each counsellor could take on 7 more clients a week, a powerful response to community and government concerns about the shortage of mental health professionals in the workforce. It also identified the top drivers of client demand. For the first time, ACA could tell policymakers the top reasons Australians seek counselling services, evidence that strengthened the conversations around mental health funding and service design. The census also showed where counsellors are located across metro, regional, rural and remote areas, and mapped career pathways and demographics. The research showed that most counsellors start employed in the industry, but then move into their own private practice after around 5 years. It also confirmed demographics. The average age of a student in counselling is actually 43, because it's usually a second or third career option. And the workforce is dominated by females. So it created a credible evidence base for advocacy and strategy. ACA now had its first comprehensive baseline for the profession, so it could support government submissions, shape student advice, inform member services, and build a long-term benchmarking exercise through repetition. For the ACA, this became more than a research project. It became the foundation for how they are going to represent the profession and plan for its future. Once they had that data, everything started to shift for them. For the first time, AuSAE could counter government claims about workforce shortages with evidence. Counsellors do have capacity in their week, showing that the profession could be part of the national solution to the mental health crisis that we have. It strengthened their submissions to national professional standards. They used the data in response to the Department of Health and Aged Care's project on counsellor standards. And having that representative data gave their submission weight and credibility. It improved member communication. AuSAE published the top findings, provided executive summary about the results, and even recorded a member explainer. This showed their members that the input and the time they had taken to complete the census was valued and put to use. And it guided student and early career members with real insights. The data, as we said before, most students came out and went into employed roles, but their ultimate ambitions were to move into their own practice. AuSAE can now give realistic advice to students and early career professionals about how they might go about that. And it sparked some discussion on gender diversity. With 81% of the profession female and a student age averaging 43, AuSAE has identified opportunities to try and diversify their workforce, support later entrants into counselling, and target resources for private practitioners. It also established an ongoing benchmark. AuSAE is committed to running the workforce census every 2 years, which ensures that it's not just like a one-off snapshot, but the beginning of a data series that will track trends and guide their strategy over the long term. And that's the ongoing commitment that builds your credibility, both within the profession and with external stakeholders. And when Jodie McKenzie reflected on the experience, she said for the first time they knew with confidence what was really driving client demand across Australia and where the workforce had capacity or gaps. The success of this project has reinforced an important lesson. Members are more willing to participate when they see that their input will be respected and will lead to meaningful outcomes. And it's this kind of leadership through evidence is exactly what builds that credibility and leads us into this next section where I'm going to talk about credibility. And I'll say that word a lot during this presentation, sorry, but it matters. Credibility is the heart of influence, and AuSAE's experience demonstrates why. Before the census, they had strong advocacy messages but limited proof. Once they had data, their standing changed completely. Government departments began to seek their input rather than respond to their requests. When you rely only on anecdotes, stakeholders, particularly government or regulators, can brush it off as just special pleading or biased opinion. But data makes your voice authoritative. With evidence, your claims are no longer, this is what our members say. They become findings backed by evidence, making them far harder to ignore. And that evidence also positions you as neutral or objective. Data is seen as impartial. Instead of advocating from emotion or self-interest, your association is demonstrating objectivity, which strengthens your standing in those public debates. And it shifts you from just lobbying to an advisor role. When you bring robust evidence to the table, you move into a role where you're consulted for solutions and hopefully asked for advice to feed into policy. Data also opens the door with media. Policymakers and journalists are more likely to listen to, cite, and rely on you if you're able to provide verified facts and insight, and that gives you the seat at the table. And trust builds influence. Credibility is not just about winning today's argument. It builds enduring influence, ensuring your association is consistently seen as a thought leader and a partner. So while the AuSAE's story is a clear example, the lesson does extend much further. Evidence earns credibility. Credibility builds trust, and trust opens the door to long-term impact. I want to move on now to another long association name and another case study, the FHIR, the Private Health Insurance Intermediaries Association. FHIR represents organisations that help Australians choose the right health insurance product. So I think organisations like Compare, The Market or iSelect. In 2019, they commissioned us to conduct their first, what they call the State of the Sector study. The aim was to capture the scale, reach and impact of intermediaries in the private health insurance market. Until then, there was no independent data that demonstrated how significant their members' role was in supporting consumers. And the research revealed just how critical FHIR members are. They're not just middlemen. They're a link helping people to find and choose the right health insurance to meet their needs, and are essential in helping consumers navigate the complexity and confusing array of health insurance products that are on the market today. They serve a very diverse consumer base, reaching different age groups and demographics. They play a big role in connecting Australians to better cover. Almost 3 in 10 policies sold in 2025 came through FHIR members. So this work gives them FHIR credibility, visibility and tangible evidence for advocacy. And it's become the cornerstone of how they demonstrate value to both members and the government. Once they had this data, FHIR has made sure to use it strategically and consistently. The survey gave FHIR the evidence to show that their members play a tangible, measurable role in the health insurance market. It moved the conversation from "we believe intermediaries help" to "here's how many people we reach, here's how many policies we deliver, here's the segments that we serve." The report's narrative and comparative context included data cross-referenced with APRA figures. So it gives that story a little bit more legitimacy. It wasn't just FHIR saying their members mattered. The numbers proved it. And comparison with APRA data gave the data external legitimacy, and it helped avoid that kind of echo chamber view. And because the findings were published and shared widely, they became part of media coverage. For example, in the latest media releases, it showed that FHIR members accounted for almost 1/3 of all health insurance policy sales. That was a 23% increase over the previous year. So their credibility in policy discussions improved. With a rigorous database narrative, FHIR could approach government, regulators, insurers and other stakeholders with more authority and confidence. So having that data gave them a level of credibility. They used it in media releases, they use it in government submissions, and they reference it in meetings with regulators and health funds. For the first time, they could point to reliable data rather than on general assertions. Importantly, they packaged their findings into accessible storytelling, a strong report supported by commentary and media-ready insights. That made it useful not only externally, but also internally for member engagement and communication. Members are now eager to provide their data year on year because they can use that aggregated data internally to compare their own performance. They also recognise the power of repetition. By committing to an annual study, FHIR creates trend data that can show how the sector is evolving over time. That gives them leverage year after year as each new release builds on the last one. And that consistency builds trend lines. It helps them detect shifts and reinforces that, this is not a one-off, it's core to their value proposition. And it's a great example of how turning data into action multiplies its value across every part of the organisation. And as Chris Zinn summed up in the press release that they have recently put out, he noted the vital role that his members are playing in helping Australians find value in their health cover, particularly during cost of living pressures. And that statement captured what the data had revealed, that his members were not simply sales channels, but advisors who help Australian consumers make sense of complex choices. And FIRE is an example of benchmarking. Benchmarking is one of the most valuable ways associations can use data. It allows you to measure how your sector compares, not just internally, but across time and against external benchmarks. In FIRE's case, the ability to compare their results with APRA data gave the study real strength. It showed that their members aren't an isolated part of the system, but a quantifiable component within it. And its members use that data to compare to industry-wide averages and benchmarks. It gives members context. Am I above or on or below the median in leads and sales and customer demographics, etc.? And it's revealed emerging trends and shifts over time. In 2024, the report showed that leads rose by 19.3%, the highest since the survey had begun in 2019. And by comparing that year on year, FIRE can detect whether intermediaries are gaining or losing ground, or whether market dynamics are shifting, like increased competition or consumer sensitivity, rather than reacting once they're obvious. It strengthens the case for resource allocation and advocacy. They use the benchmarking data to argue for the value of their members, providing health insurance and influence in policy, licensing and regulation conversations. So when the press releases from FIRE can cite record lead and sales growth, that evidence becomes tools for discussions with government, media or insurers. Decision makers are more likely to allocate budget or reform policy if the data shows clear growth or sector impact. And it anchors the narrative in reproducible evidence. Instead of relying on anecdotes, FIRE produces consistent reports that can be audited, critiqued and verified. Even critics can check the methodology and say, how did you get that number, rather than dismiss it. It's a difference between saying we think this is happening to we can prove it. FIRE distributes the benchmarks broadly, press releases, media, government, and this year's press releases reached Insurance Business Asia reports, as well as across the domestic media commentary. And because each state of the sector study is done annually, each new report adds to a track record. Trends, anomalies, deviations all become meaningful with years of data. The longer the series, the harder it is to argue that those findings are a fluke. Consistency builds trust among member governments and other stakeholders. I might just pause here, Tony, and see if there's any burning questions that attendees want to ask before we move on to the next case study.
Sure. So if there are any questions, nothing in the chat at the minute, but here's your moment to pop any questions in right now, or you can pop it into the Q&A. No, doesn't seem to be anything. So
Okay, we'll move on. Thank you.
Keep going.
So here's another example. Real Estate Institute of New South Wales. Um, they have run their monthly vacancy rate survey through Survey Matters for about 12 years now. It's a continuous data collection program that tracks rental vacancy trends across New South Wales. Every month, they gather both quantitative data, so the vacancy figures, alongside qualitative feedback from property managers about what might be influencing the numbers. Things like tenant demand, landlord confidence, or the impact of regulatory changes. REI use recurring monthly data to build longitudinal series, allowing them to show how markets respond over time to regulation, economic shifts, or seasonal patterns. They incorporate the monthly vacancy rate data into submissions to New South Wales Fair Trading and the Rental Commissioner and other regulatory bodies to provide policy evidence about policy impacts on supply and demand. They issue monthly press statements that summarises key vacancy trends, regularly picked up by major media outlets in New South Wales, and to reposition them as an authoritative voice on rental market conditions. And it shares the findings through newsletters, training, and events so property managers and real estate agencies can understand market shifts and advise their clients more effectively. So it's kind of a perfect example of how consistent, reliable data collection can establish an association as a go-to source for truth. And having this data has changed the way REI New South Wales engages with both members and stakeholders. First, it's created a trusted independent source on rental market trends. Through the monthly survey, REI provides consistent, credible data on the state of New South Wales rental market. And that credibility means the government and the media turn to them when they need information. It's strengthened their advocacy with real-time recurring data. They can track the market's response to policy changes almost in real time. That ongoing measurement turns anecdotal feedback into defensible advocacy evidence. REI New South Wales data drives headlines in major outlets every month, and that visibility boosts the association's reputation and the perceived reliability of the insights. Journalists cite them as an authority. Combining the numbers with lived experience also leads to richer, storytelling. The survey includes both quantitative and qualitative commentary from property managers about landlord sentiment and regulation pressures. So it blends the data and a narrative to make a stronger impact. And it's delivered value to members. They can see the market shifts as they happen. It helps their members advise landlords and tenants and adjust their strategies and talk to their clients. The data is used, as I said, widely, and it has established REI as the authoritative voice for policy debate. When they use their submissions to government bodies like Fair Trading and the Rental Commissioner, they shape housing policy discussion from evidence-based position rather than opinion. And it has improved their reputation. The regular publication of transparent, consistent data has repositioned REI New South Wales, not just as a professional body offering services and representing real estate agencies, but as a genuine thought leader in housing and rental issues. And I guess it shows that when associations commit to measuring and publishing data consistently, they're able to shape change. And Tim McKibben, the REI New South Wales CEO, has described the vacancy research as a game changer for their advocacy and, allows them to highlight some of the unintended consequences of rental reforms. And that impact matters. All of these examples, ACA Fire and REI New South Wales, point to one thing. Data only creates value when it's used well. Turning data into influence comes down to a few key practices. And it starts with integrity and good methodology, ensuring your data is sound, representative, and transparent. Without that, everything that comes after is built on shifting sands. The next is framing the narrative. Numbers don't persuade on their own. REI does this really well. They pair vacancy figures with quotes from property managers, so the story feels real. ACA reframed the mental health workforce debate by showing counsellors had capacity to take on clients. Then it's clear visualisation and communication. Data should not sit in spreadsheets. It should speak clearly through visuals, insights, and headlines that make sense to whoever your target audience is. And repetition also matters. One survey is a snapshot. Repeated surveys build evidence. And REI shows that monthly tracking shows how markets respond to policy. Transparency is another thing. Each of these associations share their methodology and its limitations. And that's the sort of openness that builds trust. Stakeholders know that the data isn't just spin. And finally, engagement. You need to involve members in the process from survey design through to sharing the results, because that builds trust and ensures that the data reflects the lived experience of your community or profession. So all of the case studies I've shown you so far, the pattern is clear. When you treat data as a strategic asset, built on integrity, told through story, visualised clearly, and repeated consistently, it amplifies your influence. It's not just research anymore. It's evidence with purpose. I'm going to now turn to the last case study, and this is another long association acronym, the Australasian Convenience and Petroleum Marketers Association, and fortunately we can call them ACAPMA. Since 2015, ACAPMA has been running a national monitor of fuel consumer attitudes, a biennial research program designed to understand how the Australian consumer thinks about fuel pricing, service station retailing, and the broader convenience offer. This is public opinion research. It's not conducted through their members. It's given ACAPMA insights into how the public perceives issues like fuel pricing, transparency, discounting behaviours, and even the role of service stations in the local communities. And over time, the data has revealed trends that have challenged assumptions. Things like the declining impact of supermarket fuel discount vouchers, which we all used to use, I guess, 10 years ago, to a growing use and awareness of real-time fuel price apps. One of the most interesting findings over the last couple of iterations is the gap between how retailers saw their community role and how consumers actually perceived it. And that helped ACAPMA reposition its messaging to reflect those. So this is a case where understanding the actual customer's voice, not just the member voice, helped reshape their advocacy, communications, and long-term strategy. Having this evidence gave ACAPMA a strong platform in policy discussions. They used the findings to counter claims about transparency and pricing behaviour. Instead of depending with opinion, they presented insights grounded in consumer sentiment. They regularly use these results in discussions about pricing and transparency when they're talking with the ACC. And the data completely changed the tone of those conversations. It also identified some gaps between perspectives and service station retailers, as I said earlier. While ACATMA and industry retailers knew that the work that they do in emergencies like bushfires, floods, or even COVID, where service stations are often the last to close or leave and the first to return to ravaged communities, the public had little knowledge or visibility of these efforts. So ACATMA adjusted its messaging to build a stronger case for how the sector contributes to the communities that they work in. It also strengthened their media positioning. When media reports on fuel trends, ACATMA is now regularly cited as a credible independent source, and that visibility enhances their authority. And just like the earlier examples, the fact that this research is actually repeated consistently over a decade builds even more influence. Each new data point becomes more meaningful because it's part of a trend. And it's also helped ACATMA itself. Not only has it become a powerful tool for advocacy, it's also contributed to member growth. And one particular result speaks volumes. In the 10 years, ACATMA has grown from 120 to 400 members. So that, I guess, demonstrates the value of access to high quality industry research. I'm now going to come to another poll, just to ask you if you could strengthen one area of your association's activities, what would it be? Again, it's a single response. Where do you think you need to strengthen your influence? It's interesting. Member value and engagement, which comes up, and obviously advocacy and policy influence seem to be two of the biggest ones.
There you go. I've just shared those results.
Okay, thank you. And so when you look back at, what we asked in the first poll, we were looking at having data but not using it effectively and, low response rates and those sorts of things. Those are common challenges that we see a lot. And so I want to kind of look at how to overcome some of these for you. And as I said, you're not alone. This happens. Some of these challenges, or all of them, are common across many associations. Firstly, participation and response rates. It is harder than ever to get members to fill out surveys. They're busy, their inboxes are full, and even your most loyal members won't always make the time. One of the ways to overcome this is to treat participation like a campaign and not just a request. Provide it some marketing space, give it some prominence, let it stand alone so that it stands out. Promote it across all of your channels. Use your partners or sector allies to help spread the word, and to think about offering incentives, access to the results, a prize draw, sometimes even a thank you helps. And when it's over, share the results back. That whole "you told us, here's what we're doing" message turns respondents into repeat participants the next time around. One of the second common challenge is skepticism about self-reported data. People sometimes question whether responses are truly accurate, and that's fair. We try to overcome this in two ways. The first is anonymity and confidentiality. Participants who believe that whatever data they're providing, from opinions and perspectives through to sensitive data like salary information, if they know that they will never be identified either by their association or anyone else, they're more inclined to provide more honest and objective feedback. Secondly, designing your SMART survey using clear definitions, checking consistency across and between different questions, validating the results against benchmarks or trend data or other data that you actually have that comes from an external source helps overcome some of that skepticism. Resource constraints, a perennial issue in an association. Most of you won't have research teams, and that's fine. I guess one of the tricks is to start small, like prioritize one key data gap, partner with experts who can help, and phase your approach over time and leverage, I guess, whatever else is out there or whatever data that you have yourself. And that's what CAPMA did in its first national monitor of fuel consumer attitudes. When we first did that research, it was quite a small survey, concentrating largely on consumer buying behaviour and attitudes about price. So that one focused project grew over time and over the next 10 years into a bigger research where we're finding out more pieces of information for a CAPMA to use. And that growth over time has delivered a lot of value, as we saw. And finally, turning that data into action, and that's another thing in that first poll was we have the data, we don't use it effectively. The hardest step often is not collecting the data, it's using it. So you need to plan for the, so what? So how will the results inform your strategy? What will it do to help your advocacy? And translate the findings into simple, meaningful insights that people can actually act on. And then apply them in real decisions. And most importantly, communicate the outcomes. Fire, AuSAE and REI all do this well. They take the survey data and they turn it into member value, policy influence, and media attention. So these are real challenges, but there are ways that you can overcome them. I want to show you a roadmap, I guess. Every association is at a little bit of a different stage when it comes to using data. Some are just starting out and others are already collecting information but want to make better use of it. So this is kind of a simple way to help you think about where you might be now. It starts with a data audit. What do you know about your industry, your members, and your environment, and what's missing? Then define your priorities, and that might be workforce, benchmarking, public sentiment, the metrics that are going to matter most to your strategic goals. From there, you can design the right approach, whether it's a full census, a benchmark study, public opinion. You choose your methodology, find your partners, and help ensure that you're collecting the data correctly. Once you've got the data, take time to analyse and interpret it, not just what the numbers say, but what they mean for your work and your strategy. Map it to your existing data and the environment, and find the story in the numbers to back it up. And then it's acting on that data, and we've spoken about that. And finally, repeat, because trends matter. Building credibility isn't a one-time activity. It's earned over time through consistency and transparency. I want to talk a little bit about investment and a return on investment. Good data does require time, money, and focus, but what you get back is often much greater. It's easy to see research as a cost, a line item in your budget that competes with everything else, like events or programs. But when you can connect your data directly to outcomes, reputation, membership, influence, and funding, you can start to see it for what it really is, an investment that pays for itself. And you can see that associations like a CAPMA, Fire, and REI, have grown their membership. They're seen as authoritative voices because they publish trusted, repeatable data. And they've got good reputations amongst media and regulators. That kind of reputation doesn't happen by accident. It's built through consistent and transparent research. Finally, I want to just give you this little anecdote. There's a quote often attributed to Henry Ford when he was asked how he researched the idea of the first motorized transport. And he simply said, if we had asked people what they wanted, they'd have said faster horses. And it's a great reminder that people don't always articulate what they need in a way that's forward thinking. And that's where associations play a crucial role. Your members are experts in their lived experience, but they're also close to the ground. They might tell you what's not working or what they think you can do to help, but without broader evidence, it's harder to translate that into strategy, influence, or change. And that's why data matters. It allows you to take those voices and turn them into insight. It helps you see what's going on beyond the moment and understand, what the profession you represent really needs to grow and to influence and to lead. And throughout today's session, we've seen how associations have moved beyond the anecdotes and what they heard when they first talked to members. They didn't settle for faster horses. They shifted their focus to a bigger picture. They built the evidence to drive forward-looking decisions. And that's the opportunity to listen, to ask the right questions, and to lead with vision, supported by credible, trusted, sector-wide data. Thank you, and I've probably gone a little bit over time, but I hope you have got some value out of this session, and I'm happy to take any questions or to open this up to discussion.
You definitely have not gone over time, so well done. We do have a question in here that says, as a professional discipline association that's not service-based association beyond our members, as the ones are in the case studies used in your presentations, what can we do to advocate and impact policy?
Sorry, as a what type of?
This is a professional discipline association.
So providing the member credentials and those sorts of things, is that?
Potentially, yes.
Don't
Don't know, but yes, if whoever put that question in, if they wanted to give me a little bit more info, that would be great. But anyway,
look, it's about trying to look at what your association represents, what you're there to do, and
an academic discipline
an
association.
academic. So if you're dealing with academics as members, do you mean? Can I see the chat? Can't. I probably need a little bit more context, but it's about looking at what you represent and how you serve your profession or your members and what they need to be able to do their work or their jobs or whatever with more authority and more clarity and those sorts of things. So often we talk about an 80-20 rule where, sort of 80% of the data that associations need might be similar, but there's always that uniqueness that each association has. And this is probably one of it where you need to sit down and go, okay, what do my members need? And how do I get the data to enable them to be able to fulfill those needs and to do their work with more clarity and more credibility, if that makes sense.
Thank you. This is an excellent question. And I guess it goes to what we were talking about earlier, Brenda, as far as response rates goes, but also, would you recommend doing a yearly full membership survey or breaking it up into smaller surveys throughout the year?
It depends what you're trying to achieve. When we talk about a membership survey, is it a data gathering exercise, or is it, that member sentiment about, the challenges they face and what they need their association to do to help them? Um, Usually an annual survey is enough, is what I would say, because it's really hard to act on what you're told within that space of time. If you think it probably takes about 8 weeks to field a survey, analyze the responses, and interpret the results before you can even take it to your board and say, okay, here's what we need to change based on what the data is telling us. You need time to put that into action. There are cases when if something shifts in your sector quite quickly, it is a good opportunity to quickly go out on one small or particular topic. If you can guarantee that it's only going to be 5 questions and give you what you need. So there is some argument for that. But I would say, an annual survey provides you the time and space to actually put the findings into action and communicate them back.
Um, okay, thank you. So, two questions left, which we've got 2 minutes, so 1 minute per answer. Anything we can do to bring evidence, anything we can do when we bring evidence, but politicians seem to prefer to rely on anecdotes. Perhaps this is the way we present our data.
Again, it depends who you're talking to. Politicians, our lovely elected representatives, do like anecdotes because it gives them sound bites. But when you're talking to the policymakers and the departmental heads underneath, who are feeding the information, hopefully, up to the politician, they want data. And it was interesting, like when we went to the government and social research, we had departmental heads there saying, if you can't prove it to me, I can't use it. So you're right. I think politicians love an anecdote, but those who are sitting underneath them trying to shape policy would prefer that they had data.
Fabulous. And the final question, which is for a smaller association, and small staff, how do we start to lobby the board to start looking at these data initiatives with more intent?
There's a couple of ways that I think you can look at it, and I mean, you're welcome to look at all the case studies and things that's on our website and those sorts of things. It is often hard to persuade the board to invest some money, and again, it's about starting off small, identifying perhaps one piece of data or one thing that would help you prosecute your case for your members and your representation better, and provide value, and start to try to talk the board into how that might look. The other thing, recently we're working with an association, in the board meeting, say to them, or if they say, well, if you're saying, well, I haven't got enough data for that, or somebody says, I want something, use it to help them think they made the decision. Say, yes, that's a great idea. Yes, we do need that, and we haven't got it, so we need some data. And that's what's recently happened is somebody on the board of an association said, now, hang on a minute, I really want to know X, Y, Z. And so the CEO was able to say, "Oh, what a great idea! Here's how we'll do it." So try to sort of dig into what the board is interested in the first instance and turn that into an opportunity.
Fabulous. Well, now we're just 1 minute over time, but
Oh,
thank you very much for getting through those questions. Thank you for everybody for joining us this morning. I hope that you found the session valuable. As we have mentioned, you will definitely get a copy of the slides and a recording sent out to you as soon as we can physically make that happen, usually within about 48 hours. So thank you, Brenda, for spending the time with us this morning. It's greatly appreciated. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon.
thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye now.
Bye.